and it's all you.
All right, sounds great. Well, good morning, everyone. Dawn Fluharty here. And yes, today we're going to be talking about palms, mainly focusing on the ones in California. Because though we do have palms, in other parts of the country, amazingly enough, the diseases and pests are very different, and even actually how the palms react. So JB is our rep out of the Florida area, and so he works with those East Coast palms. But don't hesitate to reach out to him if you have questions. Just know that his strain of Fusarium is different than our strain of Fusarium, and we don't have palmetto weevil, so it's a fun game of what's going on. But pretty much whatever he has, we eventually get. It just doesn't always show up here exactly the same necessarily. So if you guys do have questions as we go through this, please type them into the chat. I know there's always things that I miss covering on these webinars, so questions at the end help prompt me to remember some of the things I was supposed to say. So again, Dawn Fluharty here, and we are going to be talking about palms in California. So let's get started. All right, let's shrink this up here and okay, how do we actually come to have so many palms in California? They're everywhere. We have many different varieties, and the irony is we really started planting them as markers because they grow very tall and upright. It was a great way to mark where landmarks, missions, roads, things of that nature. So basically, we planted markers instead of street signs back in the day. And palms have done very well in California. So therefore, we kept planting more and more of them. And they're great as a street tree. As you see, they're quite narrow, they grow upright, they line streets beautifully. The only problem is most palms aren't native to California. We actually only have one native palm. How many of you guys know which one that is? Well, it's named after us. It's the California Fan Palm. This is the only native palm to California. So every other palm we brought in, and it does well enough, but a lot of them do have stress points here. So a lot of times even our California fan palms have stress points. And part of it has to do with how we treat our palm trees. And as you can see here, pictures on the left and the right, those tend to be how we grow our palms and how we prune our palms. But notice that picture in the middle. That's how our palms naturally grow. They like to have all their old fronds there protecting their trunk. Yeah, we don't like it so much because everything like rats, mice, rodents, they all will live up in there. And we get liability when they start falling and dropping. So we do try and keep our palms clean. But do know that's actually a stressor for our palms. So why are we losing our palms? Well, honestly, there's two main reasons. On the left, all that damage you see there on the trunk is climbing spike marks. Unfortunately, palms don't have the ability to heal themselves. So when you wound a palm tree, that wound is there for the life of the palm. And so the more times you climb that and spike that, the more wounds you're going to get, the more chances for you to vector in diseases such as pink rot. So it's very important that we don't use climbing spikes on palms. And I've seen some recent tricks where people pretty much, put the ladder up the palm and climb up the ladder and then spike it from there up. So you don't see the spikes right down at eyesight. It's not really an aesthetic reason we're trying to get away from spiking our palms. It's more of a health reason. Every one of those spike marks is a point of possible vectoring in disease. So the other thing we tend to do to our palm trees is we over prune them. So the way palm trees work is they have their nice big full canopy, right? Well, when we go to prune them, we're doing what this guy's doing right here. We're pruning and leaving like maybe 3, 4, or 5 right there at the top. Problem is palm trees get their nutrients from the old fronds. So as the old fronds come down, they're giving their nutrients back in to the new fronds coming up. Well, unfortunately, when we prune like this, we're pruning off the majority of the fronds that are going to be giving the nutrients back to those new fronds. So you can see the one here that has yet to be pruned. You would basically want to draw a line right across and say anything that's below that line, below where that 45-degree angle hits with that frond, anything below that, yes, we need to prune and get rid of. Anything that's above that line, that's still at a 45 or higher degree angle, you want to keep those. They're still beneficial fronds, and they're what's helping feed that palm tree. So this is something that we see a lot of, and we wonder why we see our palms suffering. Well, these are many of the reasons that's contributing to the decline of our palm trees. But this is another one. Irrigation systems, they're kind of our nemesis. Palms do not like their trunks sprayed with water. When you spray a trunk with water, they tend to decay. They get air roots that form. They break down. They lose their structural stability. So it's really, really important to try and keep all irrigation off palms. And for that matter, try and keep the turf away from your palms. Turf needs water. We got to get the turf water, so we have a tendency of having irrigation right up to it. If you pull those irrigation or those turf lines back by about 3 to 6 feet, you're going to really improve the overall health of your palm. So try not to make them compete with turf. Try to keep the water actually off of them, and realize that if you do develop these, what we refer to as air roots over here, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does show that your palm is not growing in an ideal environment. Those can be formed because of moisture on the trunk. They can also be formed because the palm is desperately trying to put down new roots to find more water. So keep that in mind. Do we ever want to just prune off air roots? No, and the reason is we're opening it up for more wounds, and we're going to allow more pests or disease to get in. So by all means, don't try and prune off or remove air roots. If they're slightly unsightly, you kind of have to deal with that, but it's better to keep them there than remove them. All right, so let's talk about how palms are so that we can kind of get a better idea of how we work with our palms. So palm physiology is completely different than our standard trees, right? These are monocots. So the way they actually work is they have basically what we talk about as pseudobark. So that pseudobark is that kind of outside layer. And then inside, we have what is called the vascular bundles. Normally, they're kind of towards the center. I have seen some where there's damage occurring, and so you'll see blocked areas with pseudobark. I think the best one I saw was there was one at the ISA show, and literally it made a peace sign. I'm not sure how they accomplished that, but it looked pretty interesting. But in the meantime, when we do our trunk injections, we have to make sure we get into these vascular bundles. They're the water flowing tissue. If we don't get in the vascular bundle, it's just going to sit out in the cortex and pseudobark and not go anywhere and not be moved and uptaked through the palm. So keep that in mind when dealing with these. We always have to go all the way through the pseudobark and the cortex to get into that vascular bundles. And that is usually at minimum 2 inches in. Sometimes we have to go 4 inches in on some of our larger, older canaries to actually really hit those vascular bundles. But similar in tree physiology, our vascular bundles tend to be pretty bright white. So if you see that white coloring, you know you've made it into that vascular bundle. And it's got kind of a stringy look to it. So it's got a different texture as well. I guess fibrous is a better word, fibrous. So same thing, we inject palms the same reasons why we inject trees. The only real difference is we think about injecting palms a little more thoroughly. We put more thought process into it for the fact that we know we're weighing this against the fact that palms don't heal themselves. So if we're going to inject a palm, we're doing it to save a palm, or because we have multiple applications we have to get in a palm, or if we know we're going to be going back to that palm and treating it again. That's one of the joys of palms, is because they don't close over that site. Sometimes we're able to keep reusing that site up to a couple years. So I'll talk to you more about site placement that'll help lengthen the life of the plug itself. But the fact that all the material stays trapped inside the tree, it's not in the air, soil, or water, that's why we inject the palms. We have to make sure we get that complete nutrient in there and that it's protecting where it needs to protect. And by doing that, we really reduce any sort of exposure to the public and especially the applicators. So we do a lot of this in the public locations. You guys have seen this done all over the place. But even in palm trees, with their monocot nature, we still see longer residuals. We see the chemicals lasting longer inside the palm because they're not breaking down to sunlight or microbes in the soil. And again, it only affects the pest that's actually feeding on the palm tree. So it's not going to affect any sort of beneficials that might also be on the palm. And of course, it's the best way to do an integrated pest management option because you're using the least amount of chemical and putting it in the most specific location possible. So When I talk about the least environmental impact, that's because we are using the least amount of chemical and we are only putting it into the organism that needs to be treated. But when I talk about the widest treatment window, it's a little different with palms in the fact that palms, we have to inject in cooler temperatures. We don't ever want to inject a palm tree above 80 degrees at any point in time of the day, not just at the time of application. Palms don't have much of a canopy to support the chemical we're putting in. So we have to be very careful about making sure we don't get any sort of phytotoxicity, any burning of those fronds. So to do that, it really helps to do it in cooler temperatures. So right now, fall, it's the ideal time to be doing your injections. However, up here in the Bay Area, apparently we're going to have a hot weekend. Not sure what you guys are looking like in SoCal, but do watch the temperatures. Try and do it in cooler. So we tend to do it in fall. We can even do it kind of in the winter and in spring. But once we start getting hot, we try to stop doing our palm injections. So when we're actually injecting a palm, like I said, it's a tiny bit different in the fact that we're only going to put one site into this palm tree. Being a monocot, we just have to hit that vascular bundle, and then it's going to take it up to those new fronds. And notice how I say the new fronds. That's because when we put product inside the palm, it only goes to the new fronds. It's not going to go out to the old fronds that are now giving them nutrients back to the new fronds. So that being said, if you have a pest infestation or something of that nature, that chemical is going to the new fronds. It will protect the new fronds coming out. The older fronds don't really get the treatment, so you may see pest or disease persist on them a little bit longer. But when we actually drill in and do our application, we have to get through that pseudobark, and then we have to get into that actual vascular bundle. So like we said, we're going to be drilling in a little bit deeper than we normally do. And then when we set the plug, because if you can, we still use a plug when doing palms, you want to have it kind of recessed about 1/4 of an inch, so that way it's not immediately visible. And speaking to that, we always want to try and pick an injection site that is not right in eye line. So if you say you're this gentleman here, he's kind of doing it, not on the street side where everyone going down the street's going to see it, not facing the house. Every time they look out their window, they're going to see it. He's kind of doing it off to either side. I'm not sure if I would have picked the driveway side. I might have picked the other side, but to each their own. But you also want to try and do it as low as possible without getting into the air roots or disturbed bark. So keep that in mind. If you have a bunch of air roots at the bottom, you have to go above the air roots. But do try and go as low as possible. Again, we know aesthetically, the lower you are, the less noticeable it is. And then after you go do that, you do your injection through the plug. You can use any of our systems. But you will notice that if palms are in really wet conditions, overly watered, sitting in turf, basically drowning, you're going to find that their vascular tissue is going to be very saturated and injections will be difficult. So if you approach a palm tree and you drill in, and before you even get the plug in, the thing is like piping out water, you know you might be in trouble. So go ahead, set the plug, but you may have to come back and say, hey guys, shut off your irrigation for the next 5 days, and I will come back and do the injections. So keep that in mind. Sometimes they can do it in the winter. We get a little rainy conditions, and sometimes that can also cause the palms to be oversaturated. So the biggest difference when we're dealing with palms is when we drill in, we want to make sure every time we sterilize or disinfect our drill bit between palms. Palms have a lot of diseases, and they're very easily passed. So you always want to make sure you're very careful about after you drill in, you disinfect that drill bit. So that way, by the time you go to the next place, it's ready to go again. And then you can see he's just setting the plug, slightly recessing it, and doing the injection. What I want to talk about here is there are 2 ways of doing it. So here in this photo, you can see we have a very long, narrow drill bit. We tend to use this on younger canaries, Canary Island date palms, who still have their petiole debris at the base. And that's because you have to go all the way through that petiole debris, all the way through the pseudobark into that vascular bundle. You might be drilling in 6 to 8 inches to do that. Whereas if it's a nice, clean, smooth trunk like this, you might be drilling in 3 to 4 inches on an older tree. So that being said, we do have the palm injection kit, which will allow you to have that long, narrow drill bit, drill all the way through all that petiole debris. And then we have this long stinger needle. So we basically push that needle all the way in through that drill hole and do your injection. The difference is we're not using the plug here. So a lot of times, once you pull this stinger needle out, one, the odds of you finding that site again when you have to come back and reapply is very slim to none. But also, that fibrous tissue is going to dry out in the meantime. So we're not going to be able to reuse that site usually. Sometimes I have seen people where they have found the site again and they re-drill it, but they drill it even deeper into new vascular bundle tissue. So I have seen that work. It's just not nearly as reliable. It's better if you can set the plug and then do the injection. And as you can see, most of the injections are done with the plugs. The only real difference we see is in the center photo where we see bark and vascular tissue on trees. We're not going to see that on our palms. That plug is going to be sitting out there for the life of the palm. So that's why it's very important we put it in a discrete location, a low location, and try to avoid plugging over and over and over again. I've seen a couple oopsies where people have treated palms like a regular tree, and they go around and they put the injection sites every about 6 inches around the palm. That was very unfortunate. So by all means, whatever injection company you are working with, please always ask for training. Every single company out there will do training. We want to make sure everyone's doing everything correctly and to the best, so it's make sure it goes correctly and all the chemical gets in and the tree heals the best it can. So that being said, we do have a couple different plug types, the large and the small. Pretty much on palms, we're almost always using the larger injection sites. And as you can see, once you split it open, there's that rubber septum in there that basically acts as a check valve to keep that chemical inside the palm. And then basically that needle just goes in, ruptures it. When you pull it back out, it seals itself. So that's how we get to reuse this check system. And for us, the difference is on a tree, we have to recess this plug below the cambium. On a palm, we still recess it, but it's not going to be below any cambium layer. It's not going to seal itself over. Sometimes we will, during applications, get some leaking. So when you set that plug into that pseudo bark, it's much more fibrous. It doesn't seal the plug nearly as well. So sometimes you'll start to do your application, you'll see a little chemical want to leak around the edge of the plug. Go ahead, just tap that plug in a little bit deeper, go again, and you should be set and fine. So we do have a myriad of systems, and I kind of wanted to talk about each of these systems when it comes to palm injections. The handheld QuickJet is really one of the best tools to do this type of application, because you can really feel how the chemical is going in the tree by just, it's your hand pressure pushing it in, right? You can really regulate it. So if you do have leaking, stop, tap it in, keep going. The QuickJet Air, since this is running off a compressed air tank and all you're doing is hitting the switch, it all goes in like that. If you have leaking, it's gonna gush. So always turn down your air pressure on that tank right there, down to 30 PSI. We don't usually want to inject our palms at anything above 30 PSI. It's just too much pressure. The seal around the plug is just not strong enough to hold strong pressure. Same if you're going to be using one of the IV systems. The yellow bucket IV, the tree IV, that blow-off valve is at 60 PSI. The blow-off valve on the F series is 120 PSI. So you don't want to run either system at max. Both of these pumps that we use have gauges on them. So just pump the bottle up until you're at 30 PSI, disconnect it and hook it up to the tree. Again, if you put it in, for some reason you see a leak, just turn off the valve, tap it in further, put it in, get it going again. So that's just something I want to talk to about pressure when actually treating the palm trees. And water. So if you do have a palm tree that has very little extra water around its base, by all means, you might want to give it a tiny bit of water at first to make sure it is uptaking, and then give it a good dose of water afterwards to make sure all that chemical is moving. So let's talk about some of the chemicals and pests. So these are all of our chemicals, insecticides that are labeled for palm treatments. Notice how AceJet is not up here, my favorite chemical. AceJet, our 911 product, is not labeled for palms in California. So Florida's one-upped us on that one. They have that available to them. So the chemical we tend to use the most, triage is an option on some of our boring pests or leaf-chewing pests. And azosol is always a great option if we need to be organic. But we mainly use the imidacloprids on our palms. They cover the most of the pests that attack our palm trees. So we do have the regular 5%, that's what we call Imajet, and the Imajet 10, which is a 10%. Usually I say if you're working in slightly warmer temperatures, always use the 10% product. You're just putting less in. If you're getting something that you want to get a good full coverage on and we're in cool seasons, by all means, use the 5%. So let's talk about some of the pests and diseases. And I am, of course, going to start with the South American palm weevil. And the reason why I'm starting with this one is though it's currently only in the very south end of Southern California, this pest can very easily travel. We ship palm trees all over the place, all throughout California, Arizona, Nevada. So we need to pay attention to this one because this is one of those pests that will probably be easily shipped on a truck and will be infesting a new area. So everyone kind of keep your eyes out for this guy. He is a weevil, so he's got that snout. Can't quite miss it. It's very evident. But with this one, he's also quite large. You can see by the size there, he's about 1.5 inches, so he's not somebody you're going to overlook. The grubs are quite large as well. Some people actually use them as a food source. Not me. But the problem with this one in particular is, you know, it came out of Mexico, and when it kind of came in, we didn't really notice it, and we were wondering why the palms were dying. And the problem is it was like just the crown died out. It's like it just stopped producing new fronds. And that's because of the way this pest feeds. It feeds on the new frond growth as it's emerging, as well as the actual meristem of the palm. And we all know since the monocot, we have one meristem. We lose that one meristem, that's the end of that palm tree. So it's very important that we actually pay attention to this one. And I know we've always talked about the fact that it's in Canary Island date palms and they're one of our highest value palms, but this can also get into coconut and the king sagos. So I'm sure it will find its way into other palms as well. I don't think it's just going to stay in those 3 varieties. We just haven't seen it there at this point in time. So keep your eyes open. If you see anything that looks like notching in the fronds, raise the alarm flag. We are tracking this one. So keep that in mind. Report it to your county ag, UCNR. I think Mark Hoddle is right now the lead on this particular pest. So, but if you talk to Don Hodell, he'll be happy to chime in as well. That being said, this infestation level was extreme. This palm had been fed on for quite some time. Usually we just see it in the first, 3 or 4 fronds coming out because we so severely over prune our palms that it doesn't have much of a food source. So it's gonna just start eating those new fronds that quickly, and eventually it'll get into that meristem. So this one was actually treated and saved, but we have had palms where literally they've only seen 2 or 3 fronds come out with notches, and then the palm's gone because the meristem's been eaten. So keep that in mind. We treat this one, usually if people are doing it preventatively, they're doing a soil drench of imidacloprid, and they're just going out on an annual basis doing a soil drench. If you actually see notches, that's when we tend to move immediately to injection. We need to get that chemical up into that meristem and protect it as fast as possible. We are still working on our trial work with the Mbect and Benzoate, the triage products. Unfortunately, with COVID, it's on hold, hoping the palm trees survive long enough that we can eventually get the research started. But in the meantime, we're recommending the imidacloprid products. And the other thing I kind of want to say is do your inspections. So when we ship palms, by all means, since we got Fusarium and everything else in our canaries, go and inspect and look at physically the palm that you're going to purchase. Then when they ship it and while it's still lying on the back of the truck or on the ground, go through that meristem, untie it, check it out, see what's going on, make sure it's healthy. There's no larvae or feeding or little, they kind of create these kind of cocoon nests up there as well. So make sure none of that's there before you actually plant it out. We know these things are expensive and nobody wants to run the risk. So some of the nurseries are starting to do preventative treatments of the imidacloprid soil drench. And so I really recommend paying close attention to anything you're purchasing in and planting, and also be working with your imidacloprid products to prevent and get rid of this pest. So like we said, it is on the move, so be aware of it. If you see anything that looks closely to it, inspect further, call someone to inspect further, call the county ag. We're all willing to come check this one out and see how it's moving. Okay, so this one's a little less scary. This is just the palm leaf skeletonizer. It doesn't actually normally kill the palms, but with our palms already being stressed from either not being native or from some disease like, say, Fusarium, we can see this being kind of the last nail in the coffin for these. And they start to brown out and just die. But you can see the little tiny larvae, kind of look like little green worms. They actually go in and they can do a lot of damage to the actual frond itself. And now that older frond no longer can give the nutrients to the new fronds. So that's where we start seeing the palms really suffer. So again, metocloprid works great on this one. When they're actively feeding, truck injection is the best way to get it in. If you have it in the area, you kind of hang on with soil drenches of metocloprid. All right, mealy bugs. These guys, unfortunately, can take down a sago, especially pretty quick. You kind of notice there's a little white stuff going on. You don't really notice. And the next thing you know, you look at it and it's browning out and dying. You're like, yikes, what happened? It's usually these little mealy bug guys. So azosol works great. These guys are usually way too small for trunk injection. I've seen some mature ones where they've done it, but usually we just do like a topical sprench almost, if you know what I mean. We just drench over the top of the plant and soak it into the soil, and the azosol, the insect growth regulator product, works very well. And essentially what insect growth regulators do, right, is they stop the feeding, they stop that wanting to reproduce, and they stop the molting or the changing of the stages, the life stages of the pest. So it usually takes a couple weeks to really take effect as you slowly but surely work through those life stages and they die out. But it's a very easy way to treat this and consistently works. So keep that in mind if you happen to get mealy bugs. Azosol is a great option for this. Okay, scales. These guys are a little bit trickier. So there are hard and soft scales that we have, or armored scales, on our different types of palms. And I hate to say it again, it's our poor sagos. There's actually, if anyone's been down to the Long Beach, by the Long Beach Convention Center, they have that beautiful water garden area, and every single one of their sagos is infested with scale. Kind of just want to go sneak a bunch of azosol in there. But unfortunately, they're dying out because scale have an incredible ability with their sucking and piercing to literally drain the life out of these palms quickly. Because again, we don't have that big canopy support. So with that being said, these guys, within 6 months, you will notice significant change in your plant material if you have this pest. If they're large enough, like the ones on the left, you can actually inject these with the metocloprid for the soft scales. If you're dealing with hard scales, I almost always go to the azosol product just because we can get those multiple life savers. We don't have to worry about when it's feeding. And so I'll tend to go to the azosol. Again, you can inject azosol, but since these are usually smaller canopies, easier to handle, I like that kind of drenching application. It seems to be a little faster, a little more effective on a wide scale, so it doesn't have to move up to the vascular tissue. Okay, so we've all heard a lot about the invasive shot-hole borer out of Southern California. We're now tracking it in Santa Barbara County, San Luis Obispo County, and Alameda County. So we're waiting for confirmation, but it looks almost confirmed. So this pest is moving. We knew it would move, and it's just because it likes healthy trees, so it loves to go into nursery stock. That being said, we have no regulations or quarantines in place, so therefore we shipped it throughout California. So that's pretty much how we've seen it move into Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, and now Northern California. That being said, we always talk about this pest in the fact that it goes after our trees. It prefers sycamores, oaks, liquid ambers, olives, but don't rule it out. It's more than happy to go into our palm trees as well. So Kentia palm, we've seen it. It really same telltale signs in the fact that we get that weeping and bleeding caused by the Fusarium that it's vectoring in and growing. But you can also see the tiny little holes, because once they dry out, the holes seem to be much easier to see in the trunk of the palms. So you'll see the tiny little holes of where they gone in. I have never seen one of the beetles backed out to these holes. And I think it's just because they sap so profusely, I can't really see that beetle. You'd think it'd make it difficult for them to survive in there, but apparently not. Resilient little guys. That said, it also goes into our king palms. Still, you see that profuse sapping. It looks different, but again, palms seem to have a much more profuse sapping effect to it. And anytime a palm saps, it really does create quite a bit of staining on the trunk. So that's something people have noticed first, usually. Palm declining, and we get the staining. You look closer, and you're like, oh gosh, I got sapping. Oh, I got multiple attack sites. Darn it, I think I have the invasive shothole borer. One of the first places I saw it was in Carlsbad at the car dealerships. A bunch of their palms are infested. But the interesting part is because these guys are boring in and introducing the Fusarium, they seem to have some success keeping that Fusarium alive in the pseudobark, which isn't necessarily getting in and infecting the actual vascular bundles. So we've seen these palms hang on a fair amount better than we've seen, like, say, sycamores and things. That being said, the other problem we have is we can't really do a good trunk injection with this particular pest on palms, because when we inject them, right, it goes into the vascular bundle and it goes up to the new growth. It doesn't spread out and distribute through the trunk of the tree where these pests are all doing their attacks. So at this point in time, bark sprays are really your best option for trying to prevent and treat invasive shothole borer on your palms. But with the Fusarium, now that is something that we can kind of help better, because that does want to clog up and move into that vascular tissue, the vascular bundles. So by injecting the propofol, it can help stop that fungal infection of Fusarium in the vascular bundles. So now that we're kind of talking about fungal infections, let's talk about some of the fungicides that we tend to use with palms. So the two main ones are propofol and Phosphojet. Phosphojet basically stimulates the trees or palms' immune system, whereas propofol is more of a fungistat and actually goes in and attacks the fungal infection itself. So Phosphojet takes a little bit longer to react. Propofol tends to act a little bit faster, but in a different way. So when I talk about treating fungal infection in palms, I'll kind of explain how these chemicals are working with each particular disease. So let's talk about the first one. First one being pink rot. Pink rot is probably more common than just about any disease I have now seen in palms, and it is very much overlooked. If you start seeing palms dying, it has a lot to do with the fact that it has pink rot. It kind of shows up as black or brown striations on the underside of the fronds. But when you pull that frond off, that's when you find this pink powder. That's the fungal spores. But you don't see that pink until you pull it off. You just kind of see fronds dying and declining, and you see those kind of black or brown striations on the base side of the frond. So there is no cure for pink rot. And if you let pink rot infest into the trunk, that's when we get trunk failures on our palms. And again, remember those climbing spikes I mentioned? That's one of the #1 ways pink rot gets into trunks of trees. We see pink rot getting into fronds, usually by too much moisture hanging around up in the canopy, or pests and birds. So for instance, rodents, rats, their little claws scratch, make wounds, the fungal infection gets in, and it continues to spread. So not just for a cleanliness reason, it does behoove us to remove any sort of seed pods, because that's a food source for those pests. Remove those, we have less traffic up our palms for them harvesting and eating it, and we don't see them nesting as much up there. So keep that in mind. That is one way to help prevent pink rot from spreading, is trying to keep rodents out of your palms. The other thing is don't let other plant material grow in, like, what we like to refer to as the pineapples and canaries. And it's only because roots are very destructive. We see roots break up concrete, right? So if you got some parasitic plant growing in your palm tree, just know what those roots are doing to that palm. It's destroying it. So that's another way we see pink rot being vectored in, is by invasive roots up in our crowns. So we use Phosphojet to fortify the plant material. It works actually quite well, but keep in mind it's not curative. If you already have it in your trunk and your trunk is looking weak and has a ton of decay, you're looking at a liability issue. You want to assess that for possible removal. If you're seeing it more in your fronds where it's something you can mitigate, by all means, you can do an injection of Phosphojet. But that'll help slow the process and heal the palm. When I talk about phosphorus, we have lots of different ones. We have ones you can do bark sprays, soil drench, trunk injection. They have a myriad of different names. Phosphojet's got one of the broadest labels out there, but still when it comes to pink rot, trunk injection is the best option because we need that full dose of that product inside the palm to trigger that protection. Soil drenches, fertilizers usually have lower amounts that are taken up, and therefore we don't get that real stimulating effect. So that's part of the reason why we really recommend doing this as a trunk injection. Okay, so then we get into sudden crown drop, and you would kind of think this is related to pink rot because again, it's that thing where we have the trunk kind of decay and then all of a sudden we just get failure. This photo was literally taken just a couple days apart. It's that same scenario where someone said, my palm's kind of leaning, you know, is it an issue? Yep, 2 days later, it was an issue. Thank goodness nobody was injured. There's slight property damage to the gate, but for the most part, they were very lucky because this was, as you can see on a residential street, somebody walking by could have had like a 1-ton crown just drop on them. These crowns are incredibly heavy. So when they drop, they do a lot of damage. We had one drop at La Jolla Marymount in a big quad area. Thank goodness nobody was around because again, it could be disastrous. Is there a way to tell when this is going to happen? No, unfortunately not. But there are things that we can see that do seem to perpetuate this fungal infection getting in. And as you can see, this one had quite a bit of plant material growing in that canopy, that pineapple area. That was the same for what we saw at the college. So be sure you try and keep any of that plant material out. Remove it by hand. Don't try using an herbicide. That will end badly. But unfortunately, we don't get a whole lot of other indicators when these are about to drop their crowns. So best thing I can say is keep your palm healthy. You can see this guy also had yellowing fronds. He had tip burn on his fronds. He probably needed some decent nutrients to fortify himself, especially the manganese. That's one thing our soils are really lacking for our palms. So it's really important that we work on some of the more micronutrients for our palms. Okay, this is another one that can kill our palms off pretty quickly, and people tend to overlook it. I always mention it because we have seen a few of these die out, and by the looks of it, I usually get the call of, hey, my canary's dying of Fusarium. But amazingly enough, when I look at the fronds with Fusarium, we see how they die down. Basically, they'll die down one side of the frond, go around the tip, and then die back down the other. Well, here you can see we don't have that death pattern. So that's the first thing I look at if I see a palm that's dying of Fusarium. I look to see at the pattern of death. In this case, it wasn't. And I had noticed that they had a bunch of bark kind of around the base. I started looking around the base, and sure enough, I found the Ganoderma. Same in trees. This is one of those things. It gets into the vascular tissue. It causes decay, and it kills the plant material. So it seems to be a little bit slower in palms, in my opinion, from what I've observed. But once it's into an area, oh gosh, it does spread very quickly. And I'm not sure why that is necessarily, but once we get into an area of multiple palm planting, it seems very difficult to stop it. So all I can say is try to avoid putting fresh bark chippings around your palms. Always make sure they're composted before you put any sort of mulch or bark out around any plant material. Naked chips or freshly cut chips are not ideal and can be detrimental and can vector disease. And in this case, I think this is what actually happened. I think they vectored in this Ganoderma in the wood chips. So unfortunately, again, just like with our trees, there is no treatment for Ganoderma. The only thing is to recognize it as quick as possible. Dig around, see if you can find those conchs. If you can, best thing to do is remove it. Remove the whole palm, which I know is not what anybody wants to hear. But unfortunately, especially with palms, there's not much we can do about it. And all it's sitting there is doing is being a vector. Okay, so now let's get into another disease. This one's mainly in our fan palms, not our canaries. And when I say it's in our fan palms, it's not in our Mexican fan palms. It's only in our California fan palms. So this one's called black diamond scale, and not inherent in its name. It is not a scale. It looks like a scale, but it's actually a fungal infection. It's actually the spores that look like scale. And unfortunately, I've heard so many people say, yeah, we use imidacloprid against the black diamond scale. It's really not effective. And I have to break it to them that it's not actually a scale pest, and that they need to be using a fungicide against it. So we have found that doing a phosphorus application with Arborjet in the fall, it's almost always a one and done application. So you inject in the fall and the new fronds come out nice and clean, no infection. And you would assume that the old fronds would reinfest the new fronds, but they don't. So whatever you do, don't cut off all those old fronds that are still feeding the new ones. Leave them there, wait till they drop past their 45, and then go ahead and remove them. So it does take a little while to recover the palm because you don't want to be removing those fronds too soon. But usually by doing a fall, by the following summer, it looks clean and nice and you're ready to go. So I like this one because it's pretty easy to take care of. And unfortunately, we've been seeing more and more of this spread. I have one instance where I've seen it in the hybrid. So hybrid Mexican and California fan palm. We've seen it now infest hybrids. So keep that in mind. It might look like a Mexican fan palm, but it might be crossed with a California, so it might be susceptible. But you'll see it. You can't miss the scale. You get these dark black diamond-shaped things on all the fronds, and it's easy to treat. Okay, let's talk about Fusarium, which is not easy to treat. So Fusarium was pretty much originally in our Canary Island date palms, but now we found it in a myriad of other palms, including the Washingtonia, the Queen palms, Don Hodel or Mark Hodel, darn it. One of them just put out a publication, I think it was Don Hodel, put out a publication on the new Fusarium strains that we're seeing in our canaries. So we're starting to do more work with, our queens. So we're starting to do some more work with the queen palms on their Fusarium infections. We've pretty much kind of got a treatment pattern dialed in for our Canary Island date palms. We can't cure it by any stretch of the imagination, but we can maintain the palm. And that's important when you got a whole street lined with these and they're all like 30 grand to replace. You just want to maintain them. So essentially what it is we actually treat with both Arborjet and Propofol. So what it is we always start with the phosphorus. We apply that and we suppress it in the fall. When spring comes, we give it nutrients, like for instance, Palmjet, and we push growth because we're suppressing the disease and we got to get this palm to outgrow it. So we push the nutrients. We come back around to the following fall and then we inject the Propofol. And now that's attacking whatever disease is in there. And then again, come around spring, we put in the nutrients and we force that growth again. So that's why we really advocate for reusing those injection sites, because otherwise you'd be putting in 4 new injection sites. But if you put that injection site in a discrete location, low on the palm and not on the south side of the palm. I have noticed if you put an injection site on the south side of the palm, it seems to want to dry out sooner, and we can't reuse that site for as long as if we put it on the north side of the palm. So there's a little caveat there. But that being said, we can do this whole treatment usually in one plug site. And you can see on the left, the ones were treated, ones on the right were not. And so we can maintain them. Are we curing them? No, but we are maintaining them. And they look pretty healthy. And you still see some signs and symptoms, of course. But pruning appropriately and then continuing the treatment program, we're able to keep our Canary Island date palms around. Okay, so let's talk about those nutrients, because honestly, the nutrients are key. If you don't have Fusarium yet in your palm, you definitely want to be working on your nutrients to keep them fortified. And I talk about nutrients so much more now because it has become documented over and over that micronutrients are the key to healthy plant material. NPK keeps them growing, but it's those micronutrients that help them fortify themselves against disease and pests. That's exactly what those nutrients do. So if they don't have them, if they're in an old planting, they're depleted in the soil, or they're tied up in the soil because it's high pH, all of a sudden they don't get their micronutrients, and now they're really susceptible to disease and pests. So the product we use is Arborjet, and as you can see, our NPK is very low. It's a 1-2-2, so we're really not trying to really fortify and push growth. We're trying to get them healthy. So we have the balanced nutrient package in there, which ironically the label is also for hardwoods. So you can use Arborjet on your hardwoods if you want to add some NPK to your application. But we did actually create this for palms. And again, just reiterating, we want to do our applications below 80 degrees. We don't want to be injecting in warm temperatures. And this was just some early results that we were showing on Frizzletop. And you can see by just giving it the nutrient it needs, the palm's able to recover and grow appropriately. And that requires, you know, the iron, the magnesium, the manganese, the zinc, the boron. And palms are great in the fact that they tell us exactly what they need. We get chlorotic palms, and just like with our trees, you know, if you inject it directly into the palm gets exactly the nutrients it needs, and it's going to green up and fortify itself. But the soil's still the problem. So you have to kind of keep still working on the soil. So there's different products you can use. There's iron plus, there's manganese plus that you can put in the soil to help fortify that soil in the off years when you're not having to inject. But usually, unless I'm specifically combating Fusarium, I will probably inject every 2 years. If I'm dealing with Fusarium, I am injecting every year because I need that palm to outgrow that disease and stay healthy. But the nice part about our palms is the #1 issue we have is manganese. So you can see you kind of get a yellowing and burning the leaf tips or frond tips. And then if you have a really severe case, you get almost like this burning or torching effect of the new growth out of the meristem. But palms are great in the fact that they tell you, like a roadmap on their frond, what they need, what's wrong. And that's one of the great things about palms. So you can look at what's going on with your palm and identify what the issue is. The only one that's a little tricky is boron deficiency. Boron deficiency and boron toxicity look pretty much the same, so that's going to require a soil test. And I've now seen herbicide damage that looks a lot like boron deficiency, so be aware of that as well. Unfortunately now with Roundup, you know, having their issues, we're using a lot of new herbicides in our industry, and we don't know what these herbicides can do. And unfortunately, we're seeing lots of tree damage over the last few years from herbicides, palm damage as well. And it's just because we don't know what can happen. So Imprellis, just know there are some new strains or some new chemical combinations of the active ingredient of Imprellis back on the market. Imprellis is the one, remember, down the southeast where they killed off thousands and thousands of trees. Well, guess what? It's back on the market and we're seeing more trees dying. So really, please look at what any sort of herbicide products you might be using. Make sure they're safe for trees. Make sure you're keeping them away from trees. Because I would say that's been one of my #1 challenges over the last 2 years is herbicide damage on trees. So let's talk about one last thing here, and that's the fabled leaning palms. I don't mean the leaning palms at In-N-Out or leaning palms at the place where I'd love. I was on vacation right now. Nope, I mean leaning palms when you see the apical meristem of a palm start to lean. That is a telltale sign of a nutrient deficiency. You can try soil drenching, you'll get a little correction, but if you really want to get that fixed literally within, you know, a month's time, inject the nutrients. It'll get up there and literally you watch these palms straighten right up. It's kind of crazy. But if you have a leaning meristem, apical meristems of your palms, it's a nutrient deficiency. Just look at them straight on, you'll see it right away. Do your nutrient injection and they'll straighten right up. So the only thing I tend to say is if you're going to take the time and water your palm, by all means, use one of our humectant products like Nutroot that help hold that water in the root zone for that palm to utilize. And then again, it's got the micronutrients that palms need, and some kelp, which has got cytokinins that helps the root growth. So that being said, if you're going to take the time to work on fertilizing or watering your palms, be sure to add this in. It doesn't add much of a cost, but it really does improve. The other time we use this a lot is when we're transplanting our palms, and it has a lot to do with that kelp in there, because it does promote the root growth and establishment. And then of course the humectants hold the water so that way they can establish. So anytime you're moving or transplanting a palm, definitely you want to use this product. And anytime you're going out of your way to water the palm, make it as efficient as possible. Add something like this Nutriroot into the product line. And of course, I'm always talking about the watering. So pay attention with your watering. Make sure they're not overwatered when you do your application, but make sure they have ample water. All right, so last but not least, we're coming around to the end of the presentation. I'm going to get to your questions in just a second, but I always ask if you guys would please do the arborjet.com survey, so I can get some feedback on this presentation, just how it's going as a whole Zoom meeting, webinar. Not a lot of feedback here. So please, by all means, do the survey, give some feedback so we know how we're doing for you, if we're covering the right information for you, or if there's anything you'd find beneficial. And that's just arborjet.com/survey. And the last thing I want to share with you is we are coming into early order season. So usually it starts around October 1st. And basically what that is if you talk with your distributor, most everyone has their early order programs going on, which can be anything from discounts to terms that are out in June. But each distributor has their own early order program. We are with pretty much all our distributors doing an early order program. So if you have any questions about it, please feel free to reach out to me, but more importantly, your distributor, and you can get some good discounts on your products going into next season. All right, this is my contact information. So if you guys would like some hands-on applications, if you're going to be treating palms and you'd like me to come on out, more than happy to be there for the first time treating palms to make sure everybody's doing it correctly, finding the best sites, and getting that chemical inside the tree. So that's my contact information. Feel free, don't try the landline. Rarely ever here. If I am, I'm probably on a Zoom meeting. Go with the cell phone, text, email, and I'll get back to you as quick as possible. So that's my presentation for you guys today. I'm going to check to see if